It's Wednesday here on the Northshore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The NFL trade deadline has passed, and the Steelers made two moves to address their situation. We'll talk about both those moves, one on offense, one on defense. Mike Williams, Preston Smith. Who are those players? I talked to Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers, about that and how Omar Khan and the Steelers handle the trade deadline. All here on the Northshore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find the show on every podcasting app, as well as on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-994-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, the Steelers made two moves. We're going to spend this first segment talking about the first move, Mike Williams. We'll get to Preston Smith, the Green Bay edge rusher, in the next. But Mike Williams, the receiver that the Steelers fans have long been asking for, and the Steelers have long been calling about. A lot of reports indicating that, hey, the Steelers were in talks with the Jets about this for a while, but they were also in talks with other teams. But Ray, when you look at players that were moved, when you compare this to like Davante Adams and Amari Cooper and DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams is like a few tiers below that when it comes to the caliber of player he is. Was this just a desperate, I guess, we're settling for this, or was this a solid depth move by Omar Khan, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's a good depth move. I think both of those moves, it's just to bolster your depth. And, in the event of an injury, you have a guy with experience who can come in and play. And I think, for Mike Williams, he's got two 1,000-yard seasons. He had 895 yards as recently as 2022. So, there was a recent track record before his injury-plagued season last year where he did produce. Now, the question the Steelers are going to find out, they're going to get an answer. Was this just a bad marriage with the Jets and Aaron Rodgers? Or have we seen Mike Williams maybe, tail off at the tail end of his career? So that's what we're going to find out over these final 9 games. Listen, I still think Van Jefferson's going to have a role. He plays the second most snaps behind George Pickens. They like him as a blocker. He's also come on since Russell Wilson became the starter. Calvin Austin has come on. So I think in the end, you're going to see those top 4 guys split the snaps. Obviously, George is going to play the most, but they'll fit Mike Williams in, and they'll see how he can help the team best.
And I think it's going to be interesting to see how he does help the team best. Because, Ray, when I look at Mike Williams, like other people that the Steelers were supposedly in on, Brandon Aiyuk, Darius Slayton, guys that they were talking, those were more route runner guys. Mike Williams is not a route runner. I'm going to go up and get the football, dude. He's 6'4", he's 218. He's not particularly a sharp guy that's going to get separation. He's going to win jump balls. And maybe, and let me know if you think this is along the lines, maybe this is a sign of like, hey, they wanted another deep ball guy like George Pickens who they can line up at the same time and say, Russell, you have 2 options here on this play, on play action. Either George is going to be double covered or Mike is going to be double covered, but they can't do both at the same time unless they do, and then someone else has got to be wide open. But maybe that's the plan here, is Mike Williams is just another deep ball threat the Steelers can rely on to maybe make some contested catches deeper down the field.
Yeah, that's a great point. You can have them on the field at the same time. Listen, if George Pickens gets hurt, you have somebody like him, his size and his playmaking ability to put him out there as well. But I do think you're right. I think in the end, Arthur Smith's affinity for tight end packages of this year, he's still going to have that. That's a part of his identity. But I do think we'll see Mike Williams eat into some of those snap counts for guys like Connor Hayward, not so much Darnell Washington, maybe Michael Pruitt. I think in the end, you're going to want to get your best players on the field, your best playmakers on the field. And I think Mike Williams is going to be one of those guys eventually once he figures out where he fits in this offense.
Yeah, I think that that's going to be part of the question here for Arthur Smith is how quickly can you incorporate this guy into what you're doing on offense? Because the Steelers, when Russell Wilson has been in, again, 2 games, very small sample size, but he has the most yards per attempt on play action passes. And I think he has the most yard per attempt on deep passes. So he's efficient with the deep ball, which is what the Steelers thought they were getting from the Denver Broncos and from his entire career. So for me, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking like this all adds up for Mike Williams being that guy. And again, Mike Williams isn't going to come in and get 800 yards in 8 games. Like he's not going to be a superstar or anything like that, but he's another option on the field that I think fits that role maybe better than a Van Jefferson does. Van Jefferson to me is more of like a stronger slot guy. Like he's a little more physical. He can make some contested catches underneath, but he wasn't a go up and get the ball guy. Calvin Austin is a faster slot guy. He could get behind you really quickly if you didn't have a safety over top of him. Mike Williams is a guy he's a stronger outside guy that he can go up and win those contested catches, and he won't do it as often as George Pickens, but he does give you that legal thing here. And when you look at it again, 6'4", 218, that's huge, right? Like that's basically tight end size. So if you're a defense and you're dedicating a safety over top of George Pickens and your number one corner probably on Pickens, you probably have like a 5'10", 5'11" cornerback trying to run with this dude. And that's, again, Russell Wilson loves his moon ball. That's an opportunity to strike there.
Yeah, let's say you come up with a package where George Pickens is on the field, Mike Williams is on the field, and you have Pat Freiermuth and Calvin Austin on the field at the same time. You're going to get a lot of defensive coordinators in dime packages. And then that gives Arthur Smith a great opportunity. Okay, you want to be in dime? We're going to play to our identity, and we're going to run the ball. So that's a great point that you make. And they still have the ability to go big and to physically pound you too with Darnell Washington, put Van Jefferson in the game if you want to run 4-minute offense to close out a game or, to close out a half, something like that. So, they're going to have they've been multiple this year with their personnel packages.
Yeah.
But I think the addition of Mike Williams just gives them one more added chess piece where they can just go ahead and say, okay, we're going to give you our personnel package. Let's see what you do. And then we'll have a call from there at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I think that's part of what the Steelers are looking at right now with how they're going to try to balance it. Because that's the other thing, right, is that like we've talked about, they haven't been running out. Like back when they had Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant, Juju Smith-Schuster, they'd come out in 11 personnel a lot. And why? Because that was their best group. Like you had Juju in the slot, Martavis and Brown on the outside. You had Bell in the backfield. Then you had, your tight end, whether that was, I think, Heath Miller for a little bit. And then I think it was Ladarius Green maybe for a year, Vance McDonald. But either way, those are the guys you wanted on the field every time. Now you have that mix where you might want double tight end, you might want triple tight end, you might want 2 wide receivers, and you might want 3 wide receivers, you might want 2 running backs with the way that they use this offense. But again, I think Mike Williams simply contributes to the chess match that Arthur Smith can create for defensive coordinators to say, hey, you have to have a very diverse set of skills in your defense to take away everything that this offense does. And maybe that will allow the Steelers each week to say, hey, they're playing the Commanders this week. Do the Commanders, if the Commanders are really good, they just traded for Marshawn Lattimore. If they're really good at cornerback, maybe you take advantage of their linebackers. If they're playing the Ravens, Roquan Smith is a really good linebacker, but they don't have a pass rush and their secondary hasn't been great. Maybe that's when they use more wide receiver heavy packages to try to get them in mismatches. I think what Mike Williams helps do is give them more options like that to catch opponents off guard. And that to me is where it's worth. And again, just a 5th round pick and it's just a year's rental. So, there's that equation to it. But Ray, I think that a lot of people wanted a superstar, a big name to come out of this. Mike Williams, more of a chess piece than a big name.
Yeah, listen, I think we should point out, Chris, that the Steelers have now dealt away their 5th, 6th, and 7th round picks. And depending on what happens with Justin Fields, it's probably going to be a 6, but maybe it turns into a 4 if he has to come back and play again. The expectation for the Steelers is they're going to have some comp picks in the spring, Chris. They're going to lose Dan Moore in all likelihood. They're going to lose James Daniels. They're going to lose Najee Harris and Justin Fields. They are expecting to recoup some of these picks in the spring. That's why Omar Khan felt so comfortable trading away those mid to late round picks. He fully expects to get some back. Now, a lot of that depends on what they do in free agency. There's a whole big complicated formula that maybe we can explain to the fans out there in the spring, but rest assured he did not make these moves trading away half his draft without knowing he's going to get some back in the spring.
No, I agree. And plus, they have 2 5th-round picks before this, so now they have one. They have 2 7th-round picks. Now they have one. So they have plans. And like you said, comp picks are going to be very interesting to see how that's handled this year. All of that will be determined moving forward. But we got to talk about the other guy, Preston Smith. What does he do for the Steelers defense? Because a lot of people, I think, weren't thinking edge rusher. Where'd that come from? We'll talk about that impact next here on the Northshore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, what remind you the show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, whether you're probably wondering what's next. Well, for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder and Associates have helped injury victims answer that very question. Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with the insurance companies, Edgar Snyder and Associates have helped over 75,000 people handle the what's next question. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Okay, Ray, it's time to talk about Preston Smith, the edge rusher the Steelers got from the Packers for a 7th-round pick. This is a different feel because, to me, Mike Williams is an unproven guy that could be injured and all this other stuff. Preston Smith is like a proven, solid guy up front that can help on the outside. He's an edge rusher, and he's a bigger edge rusher. And, I was talking to some colleagues of mine who cover the Packers, and I was like, hey, I see a size of 6'5", 265. That looks more like a 3-4 D end than an outside linebacker. And they're like, yeah, but that's probably where he's going to line up at. And to me, Ray, I see this and I think, okay, maybe this is just the 4th guy that they were always hoping to have in Marcus Golden behind Nick Herbig. And if Nick Herbig can come back healthy soon, this gives the Steelers a 4-man rotation on the edge again, which could give them some diversity there. What are your thoughts on their signing of Preston Smith or trading for Preston Smith, excuse me?
Yeah, and also look at it like they're replacing DeMarvin Leal. DeMarvin Leal was that hybrid defensive end / outside linebacker. Now, Preston Smith has obviously a longer history. You're basically talking about DeMarvin Leal, who was a D lineman, who was athletic enough to play outside a 3-4 outside linebacker. Now you have Preston Smith, a trained 3-4 outside linebacker who does have that ability at his size to bump inside sometimes if you need him. So, Jeff Hafley came in to the Packers this year, new defensive coordinator out there. They also invested a 1st-round pick in Lucas Van Ness. So, he was basically splitting time with Van Ness, I think. So that's, they feel like Van Ness is ready and they felt like he was expendable. It doesn't mean he's quickly deteriorating. It's just that, they want to bump up a high draft pick and they felt like he was expendable at this point. But, for the Steelers, when you look at it, Chris, kind of perfect, especially when Herbig comes back. You have that number 4 outside linebacker. He doesn't have to play the number of snaps that he was playing in Green Bay, so he can play those 15 to 20 snaps at outside linebacker, give TJ and give Alex a blow once in a while. And you have the ability with his body type to move him inside to play a 5 technique or inside, put him up over a tackle instead of a tight end. And maybe he could shore up your run defense too, because the run defense, the last couple of weeks without Mon Adams, it hasn't been good. So they got to get that rectified. And I'm sure they'll figure out how Preston Smith can help there as well.
No, I agree that there's options there. I also think an interesting contrast Preston Smith gives you, because one thing, like DeMarvin Leal was a defensive lineman that they would put out on the edge, but Leal was never a physical guy. He was still a quicker guy that was a defensive lineman that they were trying out there. Preston Smith is used to this, and he's also, when you watch his tape, and again, I've only watched like a couple of games of just picking through some things that I saw, but he looks like a guy who's used to being physical with his hands, with his legs, getting leverage and taking down tight ends, sealing edges, turning things back. Looks really good against the run. To me, Ray, what makes this also interesting is that now you have Watt and Highsmith, still your top guys, or easily your top guys. But now with Herbig and Smith, you have a chance for one guy to rotate guys in, not just as a pair, but say, hey, you know what? We think that this offensive tackle over here is worse against quicker guys, or we think this offensive tackle over here is worse against bigger guys. Now you can pick and choose when and how to do those guys. And also, one of the packages we've heard the Steelers maybe talk about using, but they probably couldn't. Mike Tomlin kind of alluded to this a little bit on Tuesday. But, there were times people wondering, what if you put Watt, Herbig, and Highsmith on all at the same time? And before I was like, well, you can't, because you need one of them to survive. You need two of them to be ready. Now, when you have a guy on the bench, now I think you can do that and, not feel like you're putting all your only outside linebackers that are available to you out there with Preston Smith. And you can also rotate him in on some of those packages. But I think his ability to stop the run, his contrast to how he's built compared to Nick Herbig, all make this for an intriguing way for how Terrell Austin, Mike Tomlin, and Denzel Martin, how they can all work together to make this a more complex run stuffing and pass rushing effort up front.
Okay. Yeah, Chris, it's gonna be interesting to see how they deploy these outside linebackers now. You mentioned that they have different types of guys that they can rotate in. And I think it was a couple of years ago down in Baltimore where they went to a package with 3 outside linebackers on the field. Alex Highsmith dropped into coverage, picked off Lamar Jackson. So obviously it's going to be game plan specific week to week. You're not going to be able to do that every week, but maybe for a team like the Ravens, a team that likes to run the football, maybe you want bigger people on the field, and maybe you can also drop some of those guys in the coverage like we saw Alex Highsmith do a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of things that can be done here with the Steelers defense and a lot of things that need to be done, because even though they're the number 2 defense and they're doing this, they're going up against a tough Commanders team. Well, I want to sit back and talk about the overall picture of how the Steelers handled this trade deadline process, because we've been covering it the entire time here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, not just this week or the lead up to the trade deadline, but how they handled things from all the way back in March when they traded away Kenny Pickett, when they brought in Russell Wilson in free agency, when they traded for Justin Fields, to not trading for Brandon Aiyuk, to not trading for other big name wide receivers, to bringing up these guys, and what it says for their team, what it says about Omar Khan, and what it says about Mike Tomlin and the Steelers heading into the second half of the season. We'll do that next here on the Northshore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by Savinas, Cannon, Gallucci, the mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda. Get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or go to their website, moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, Car and Driver's most awarded brand in 10 Best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
We're back here at the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, now that we know the moves are done, the deadline's done, we don't have to worry about, you or me having to re-record an episode because they've traded for somebody. I was really worried that something like that was going to happen. It was funny. As soon as we always do like our post Tomlin videos, and as soon as we packed up Ray and Jerry and I took the mics off of them and I was uploading the video to our Google Drive to send it off to Adam and everybody, then we see the first trade, and I'm just like, oh, we could not have been worse time for this. But that's all done. We don't have to worry about re-recording anything ever again, at least until next year. So that's a great feeling. But Ray, we talked about this for a while, and there was a narrative out there that the Steelers were missing out on receivers. They were missing out on Brandon Aiyuk. They were missing out on Cooper Kupp. They were missing out on Amari Cooper. They were missing out on Davante Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, all these players' names. And then they get Mike Williams. Do you feel like the Steelers mishandled the trade season that was the first 8 weeks of the season? Or do you think that Omar Khan's patience and what he wound up with was the right path for this franchise?
Yeah, listen, I think Khan had a price in mind for each of those players that you mentioned, but we should also say first and foremost, the Cooper Kupp thing was never going to be happening. He was never really available.
As was Amari Cooper.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't going to get traded within the division. So that was never really on the table either. So I think Omar had a price in mind for Aiyuk. Aiyuk in the end wanted to re-sign with the 49ers. That's his prerogative, right? It was dumb. Mm-hmm. The Steelers and 49ers. That's Omar was in that one. I cannot fault him for that one. Adams wanted to play with Rodgers. The only one you could sit back and nitpick is maybe DeAndre Hopkins, because
That's the one. I agree.
Yeah, the Chiefs got him for a 5th-round pick. So the Steelers waited until deadline day. They kind of played cat and mouse with these other teams and waited for them to see what they were going to do. The Chiefs were proactive. They went out and got their guy. What was it? 10 to 14 days before the deadline. And here DeAndre Hopkins is catching 2 touchdowns in that victory for the Chiefs the other night. So, hey, maybe, we don't know. Maybe Hopkins wasn't a fit in Pittsburgh. I don't understand how he couldn't be. Maybe there was something they didn't like about him. But if you do want to sit back and nitpick one of those receivers, he's probably the only one I would do it with.
Yeah, I think that's where you look at it and you say, like, hey, man, if they could have brought in D-Hop. But here's another thing. DeAndre Hopkins, like Davante Adams, is toward the end of his career. He probably like, look, I want to go somewhere that I know I'm going to win at. And, I only got too many more chances. So maybe he also was like, send me to the Chiefs. I will take that and work with Patrick Mahomes. Whereas if you went to the Steelers, I think he would have made the Steelers very interesting competitors. But again, you're not with the undefeated favorites that have won 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. So, I look at that situation and I think, man, like that, I'm not so sure that they would have been in contention with that guy either. So I kind of think that part of this is just the reality that Steelers fans and people in general need to remember when trade season is happening, it doesn't work like Madden where you can just, they have the play. I'm just going to send them a trade. Oh, they declined the trade. Well, I'm going to send it again with this a little bit to it and this a little bit to it. And finally got this player. Great. That's not how it works because now everyone else is also competing with you. And those teams are also like, hey, we'll take this. There's misinformation. There's disinformation. There's so many factors into it. And so to me, I think a big part of this, Ray, is Omar Khan through 2 years has revamped the Steelers offensive line, their quarterback room. I think he's in the process of doing that with the wide receivers, the cornerbacks, the linebackers, and he's added pieces on the D-line and in the safety room. And to me, like all that revamping he's been doing in just 2 years' time, maybe patience is needed as he continues to knock things out piece by piece.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be a long-term project. When you take over as a GM and you pretty much sweep the pro personnel department, the scouting department, there's going to be a transition period, but he's also working under Art Rooney, who said we have to start winning playoff games again. So it's not like it's a situation where it's a total rebuild. They are rebuilding on the fly, and they're trying to do it while they're trying to contend, for a championship. So, there's early on in his tenure, the Claypool trade, we were getting a lot of the con artist stuff. More recently, when he didn't land Aiyuk and Davante Adams, people were saying he wasn't doing enough. But Chris, the reality is that the players today, more than ever, can dictate where they go. And it's just good business for a team like the Titans to say, hey, okay, where do you want to go? Let's do you a favor.
Yeah.
We're not going to win this year. Okay, we'll trade you here for a 5th-round pick. I mean, that's good business. They'll get free agents in the future if you take care of players. Players talk around the league. So, maybe that was part of it as well. I think you touched on it. That's probably part of what happened with this as well.
I think that's the other thing too, is like you said, teams are trying to figure out what relationships they can, kind of set the tone for. I think the Steelers generally have a good reputation for how players feel when they leave the organization. And that's something that they're mindful of, but everyone's mindful of that and everyone's trying to do that. And again, it's why, we're saying like, hey, when just because they didn't get one player or another player doesn't mean that they didn't try or that player wanted to get them. Maybe they wanted to be, with someone else that is doing something that plays a certain way they want to play or with a certain player that they don't have. So there's a lot of factors to account into it. But I think one thing for sure is that the Steelers, they turn over every rock. Like Mike Tomlin addressed that on Tuesday during his press conference. He was like, hey, we're always active in trade talks. Like it's never that we're not. It's just that, it doesn't always result in the gratification of seeing it happen every single day. And I think that, when you're a Steelers fan and you're out there and you see, other teams making moves and you're just like, well, where are the Steelers? Where are they sitting on their hands? No, they're not. But the moves they're probably making are something else going on in the background. And for example, we got the report they tried to get Christian Kirk, and maybe they would have. Maybe it wouldn't be Mike Williams. Maybe it would be Christian Kirk as a Steelers wide receiver if he hadn't broken his collarbone.
Right. Yeah, listen, every contender is out there making moves as well, Chris. Every GM that is in a position to win this year tried to do something at the deadline. Maybe not all of them got it done, but listen, the Steelers are playing on Sunday. They went out and got themselves a number one cornerback to help them down the home stretch. So every team is trying to improve late in the season. The Steelers didn't add a starter, I don't think, but they certainly added 2 depth pieces who I think both those guys will help them down the stretch if they stay healthy.
Agreed entirely. We still have to see how this team approaches the Washington Commanders. Like you said, they added big time at cornerback, and they're already a pretty good team. This is going to be a tough matchup for the Steelers. The Commanders are actually favored in this matchup as the Steelers head to DC to take them on. We'll preview this game more with Brian Batko at the end of the week on Friday as we get you a look into the future here. Who's back for the Steelers? Mike Tomlin said there's several people that could be back. Zach Frazier, Nick Herbig, Cordero Patterson, Corey Trice, Tyler Matakevich. All those guys, we'll see how they practice throughout the week. Read about all of it in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Ray, thank you for joining me, and thank you all for joining us here on the Northshore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. We'll see you here Friday right here on the Northshore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.